Perry, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you say please and thank you to your AI assistants while you're using them, ChatGPT, Claude, and whatnot?
It depends. Not consistently, but every now and then I find myself doing it. And then sometimes I do it intentionally to try to see if it gets a different response.
Interesting. But you're not a part of the crowd of people who are like, oh, I say please every time just in case the robot uprising ever happens. That's
I'm not a robot uprising, please and thank you type of person that's trying to seed goodwill ahead of time. I've done enough bad things to these that I'm pretty sure that if they're already collecting a file that I'm on it, and no amount of please and thank you is going to fix that.
Yeah, you've burned that bridge long ago.
Right.
At this point. Well, Sam Altman will thank you. This is just a funny story. And Sam Altman doesn't even necessarily think you shouldn't do this, but he did admit that being polite is wasting money. Found this out from this Futurism article. Sam Altman admits that saying please and thank you to ChatGPT is wasting millions of dollars in computing power. And what happened was a poster on Twitter just wondered aloud how much money OpenAI has lost in electricity costs from people saying please and thank you to their models. And Sam Altman chimed in and said, tens of millions of dollars well spent. You never know. So Sam might be, it's all tongue in cheek, right? I don't know. I don't sincerely think that saying please or thank you is what's going to save you in the robot uprising if that were to ever happen, which I don't really think is likely. So I think Sam's being tongue in cheek here. But there's something to talk about in that it is using compute, right? Because if you just send a prompt that is thank you or please, it's got to run all these calculations just to return that. But I can't help but think, why don't they just intercept that on the way in? Or have some sort of non-AI algorithms.
Yeah, you could filter that. I mean, that's the problem with all the other things, right? So in cybersecurity, there's this whole concept whenever you're coding a UX that you should be doing input validation because when you don't, you end up being susceptible to SQL injection, cross-site scripting, other input validation stuff. And it seems like the AI world hasn't figured that out yet because we would be able to deal with a whole bunch of potentially malicious prompts that way, and then also strip off please and thank you if you wanted to.
I think it's interesting because input validation, typically you're looking for the most simplest form would be you'd want to break out of any sort of code characters and things that could otherwise cause things to execute. But because you interface with LLMs through natural language text, I'm sure that becomes a bit more complex. But there's other kinds of natural language processing that aren't like LLMs that could probably handle determining if something is simply an acknowledgement or a politeness.
Yeah. I don't know the best way to. I guess maybe you waste your compute dollars somewhere else and you get a smaller LLM just to process the request and get strip out any niceties and maybe even try to inject some understanding of what the prompt is to figure out which parts to leave in, which parts to potentially modify before passing to another one.
Kind of like Anthropic's classifiers, constitutional classifiers that pre-check for harm, kind of doing that. Like having a middleman to hand the message and optimize your prompt for compute. I guess that could happen.
And I think so. And I think that does happen because you see in a lot of, especially like the image and video generation AI systems, they have these like little magic prompt things that you can click on, which will take your really boring prompt and then add a whole bunch of cinematic language and try to really craft the image the way that it's trying to interpret your meaning behind it. And I think that this is maybe a side conversation, but I've heard a lot of people over the past year say that prompt engineering will not be a thing that people have to learn. I think that's still dead wrong because everybody uses Google right now. Everybody uses search engines. But people that started at the very beginning where they had to understand Booleans very well and then understand a whole bunch of interesting little Google dorks like, Insight and all that where you can search specific sites. And there's way more productivity that can be gained through understanding how a search engine works than just throwing stuff into Google. And I think that the same is going to be true for prompting forever.
And I think you're absolutely right because that goes into part of what is talked about in the Futurism article of like the use of polite language will steer the kind of response you get. So, similar like using Google, you can absolutely use Google more efficiently. And I didn't realize I had taken this for granted. I'm probably, based on just my age, like on the cusp of people who are taught how to Google. because I don't think most people younger than me know really the significance of using Booleans. And actually, I think Google sort of stopped putting as much significance on Booleans, but there's still tricks like cite, after, before, all those other things. And yeah, having that knowledge and using it will always be good. And I think that putting something in between the user and the AI will make it harder to use, similar to how Google making fuzzy search, making search fuzzier has kind of made it harder to use for research. I imagine the same could happen with AI if we approach it that way.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I do always think that for somebody that has grown up or has been formally trained in coding, somebody that's been really formally put a lot of work into prompting and understanding the way that these work under the covers, they're always going to have an advantage whenever they go to whatever interface is presented to them versus somebody that just assumes that the machine is going to do most of the interpretive work.
Well, we're going to have to hit on that in segment 3 even more when we talk about vibe coders. But to turn back to just the wasting of money and power from being polite to AI, there was a survey done to see how many people are very polite to their AI and why. So I'll show the results of that now. This is from Tech Radar. We'll link it in the description. And they found that 67% of people are polite with their AI tech, so just ChatGPT when they're using it.
Oh, interesting.
And it's broken down. 55% say yes, it's just the nice thing to do. Another 12% say yes, when the robot uprising happens, I don't want to be first. And then the other, whatever other percentage, 20, and then this one that's cut off because I blew it up so it'd show on the screen. Whatever left over after 62%, just don't. Because of efficiency or because, why would they? So it is still a vast majority of people saying please and thank you, and that's using more power. And if you believe a lot of the reporting that's going out around power usage, that could add up to a lot. There's this article that is linked from that Futurism article, unless I made a mistake. I believe it's linked to the Futurism article. It's this Washington Post article from September of last year saying that it takes a bottle of water per email if you use ChatGPT to write a 100-word email. Now, I wanted to hit on this again and bang on this power drum one more time. That I know that I talked in the past about wanting to do a big analysis on AI and power usage because these claims seem completely orders of magnitude outlandish to me. And I just quickly tracing some of the sources in here, they all kind of lead circularly back to small papers that all reference that original IEA report that lumped in crypto with AI. And there is a new article that you sent to me from Axios that actually says that these numbers may be overblown. And this is the first reporting I'm seeing that seems to be looking at different, more modern numbers in different sources. And it's not to say that AI power use is not a factor in environmental concerns. It absolutely is in power use and water use, but it's not as crazy as dumping out a bottle of water. I've seen people on social media make the connection that if saying please and thank you is wasting millions of dollars, it's also wasting tons of gallons of water and stuff like that. So our politeness is literally killing the planet through this stupid robot. And that's just not true.
I understand the concern for that. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of water consumption versus water use. In those studies, because when you're in kind of closed system, water cooled environments, it is the circulation of the cooling. It's how much is needed, and then there's some displacement, there's some condensation and replacement of that needs to happen. But I think that people kind of mix those numbers every now and then, and there's not a really good, clean analysis that I've been able to find that makes the conclusion really clear.
Yeah, there's no clean analysis of all of it. But I will say that there are evaporative cooling towers that are pretty commonly employed where the water that is heated from being pumped through all the computer systems is then run over these fiber boards, which have air blown over them, and they evaporate, which also cools remaining water, but it does produce a lot of steam. That water doesn't always come down in the same place, so that is a problem. And that is actually employed in a lot of places. So there is a water use. In a lot of cases, that water is not potable. In some cases, it is, and that's not good. But it is just so much more nuanced, and there are a lot of closed-loop systems, and we are moving towards even more and more closed-loop systems and more efficient things. So that power use landscape is changing, and there's just a lot to simplify.
Yeah, and I guess speaking of that, if you're a power user of a large language model, maybe you don't need to use please and thank you. But I did see a post the other day of somebody talking about like whenever they go and they introduce AI use and large language models to people, they don't discourage the use of please and thank you because they're trying to let people lean into the fact that it's a different form of computing. And if you approach it like a conversation in a brainstorming session, that's different than just kind of feeding in, A plus B equals C type of things. And you're going to have a potentially better outcome if you can just, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, vibe with it.
Yeah, talk to it like a person. I mean, I think that's important too. Like, I think it helps illustrate to people how these things work. And then also, depending on what you're doing, saying please and thank you will get you statistically closer to the type of response or tone of response you want in some cases. So
it could. And then sometimes you just got to say, make me a sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. I've stopped thinking about it as chatting and more about strategic use of language as input now as like
That's what I do too.
Yeah.